The night was supposed to be a clean getaway. A crew of seasoned criminals had been planning this heist for months: steal a luxury private jet, disappear before anyone knew what hit them, and cash in big. Everything had gone smoothly. They'd overpowered the security, bypassed the locks, and were ready to take off. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: the jet's owner. A man they assumed was just another wealthy businessman, clueless about what was happening. What they didn't know was that he wasn't just some rich guy, he was a former Air Force pilot. Standing in the shadows of the hangar, he watched as the criminals made their move. They were cocky, laughing, convinced they had full control of the situation. One of them climbed into the cockpit, flipping switches like he knew what he was doing. But flying a jet wasn't like stealing a car. And the moment that engine roared to life, the real owner stepped forward. The tension crackled in the air. They hadn't even noticed him yet. But they would very soon. And when they did, it wouldn't be the easy job they thought they had walked into. Because this man had spent years in the skies, training for situations just like this. And now, in his own jet, on his own turf, they were about to realize they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. And just as the first wheel started rolling down the runway, he made his move. The jet's engines roared to life, vibrating through the hangar as the criminals prepared to taxi down the runway. The leader of the crew, a man with a scar running down his jawline, smirked as he glanced around. They had done it. Another flawless job. Inside the cockpit, his right-hand man struggled with the controls. "Told you we should have brought a real pilot," he muttered under his breath, twisting knobs and checking gauges. He had flown small aircraft before, but a jet like this was different. Still, he wasn't about to admit he had no idea what half these switches did. In the shadows, the true owner of the jet moved with silent precision. His years in the Air Force had sharpened his instincts. He had spotted their weaknesses the moment they entered overconfidence, carelessness, and worst of all, underestimating him. They thought he was helpless. They thought he was just some rich guy who would be too shocked or scared to act. Big mistake. He waited until the jet started rolling forward, then stepped into the dim glow of the hangar lights. "You boys look like you're in over your heads." The crew snapped their heads toward him. For a split second, there was silence, just the hum of the jet's engines filling the air. Then, laughter. The leader leaned against the wing, amused. "Look at this," he said, spreading his arms. "Guess we left one behind. Should have locked the office door, old man." The pilot didn't flinch. He was in his early 40s, but there was nothing slow or soft about him. His stance was controlled, calculated. He had faced far worse threats than a handful of thieves. The man in the cockpit cursed, still fumbling with the controls. "Yo, this thing's got way more tech than we thought. I need a second." "Take your time," the owner said smoothly. "Of course, without the right knowledge, you might not make it past the runway. This jet needs a very particular touch." The leader's smirk faltered. "That a threat?" He shrugged. "Just a fact." Tension thickened in the air. The crew wasn't used to their targets talking back, let alone standing their ground. The leader pulled out a pistol and leveled it at him. "Why don't you turn around and walk away before this gets messy?" The pilot's eyes locked onto the gun, unfazed. His mind was already working, calculating the best move. He knew their type. They wanted to be in control, but they were sloppy. The leader was gripping the gun too tight, nervous. The man in the cockpit was sweating, hands shaking as he flipped switches at random. The others? They were just muscle, standing around trying to look intimidating. He took a slow step forward. "You really think you're walking out of here with my jet?" The leader's jaw tightened. "Yeah, that's the plan. Then you're about to have a real bad night." Before they could react, he moved. Years of training kicked in. He lunged, grabbing the leader's wrist and twisting the gun away just as it fired. The shot went wide, echoing through the hangar. The others scrambled, caught off guard. The pilot didn't give them time to recover. He spun the leader around, using him as a human shield. "Drop it," he ordered the others, pressing the stolen gun against the leader's side. The man in the cockpit hesitated. His hands hovered over the controls, torn between running and fighting. The others weren't as conflicted. One of them lunged. The pilot shoved the leader aside and ducked just in time. A fist swung past his head. He countered with a sharp elbow to the attacker's ribs, sending him stumbling. Another rushed forward. The pilot sidestepped, catching the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The leader recovered fast, grabbing a wrench from the nearby toolbox. "Enough!" he roared, swinging at the pilot's head. He barely dodged, the metal whistling past his ear. He kicked out, catching the leader in the stomach. The man grunted, staggering back. Then, a deafening roar filled the hangar. The jet was moving. The man in the cockpit had panicked and pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft lurched ahead, rolling toward the open runway. The leader's eyes widened in horror. "What the hell are you doing?" The pilot didn't hesitate. He sprinted for the jet as it picked up speed. The open door was still hanging low. He leaped, grabbing the edge and pulling himself up just as the wheels left the ground. Inside, the panicked thief struggled to control the jet. The pilot stormed into the cockpit, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him from the seat. "This is my plane." The man barely had time to scream before he was sent tumbling into the cabin. The pilot slid into the seat, hands moving instinctively over the controls. He had done this 1,000 times. He leveled the wings, stabilized the climb, and took control. Below, the remaining criminals stood frozen, watching their escape plan disappear into the night sky. The leader clenched his jaw, rage burning in his eyes. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because now it wasn't just about stealing a jet. It was about payback. The night sky stretched wide and endless as the jet soared higher, slicing through the darkness like a predator reclaiming its domain. The pilot's grip was steady on the controls, every movement precise, instinctual. His heart pounded, but not from fear. It was the thrill of being back in the cockpit, the familiar dance of man and machine. But this wasn't just about flying. This was survival. Behind him, the thief who had tried to take control of the plane groaned, struggling to his feet. The cabin lights flickered, casting eerie shadows as he stumbled forward. Panic twisted his features, his hands trembling as he reached for something, anything to use as a weapon. The pilot didn't look back. He could hear the man's ragged breathing, feel the tension thickening in the air. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he warned, his voice calm, controlled. The thief hesitated, eyes darting toward the cockpit door. "You don't get it," he muttered. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The pilot let out a slow breath, keeping his focus on the controls. Below them, the city lights stretched in glittering veins, unaware of the battle happening thousands of feet above. He adjusted the altitude, scanning the radar. "Funny," he said, "I was thinking the same about you." The thief lunged. The pilot was ready. With a swift motion, he ducked under the attack, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting. A sharp cry filled the cabin as the thief's knees buckled and he crumpled against the control panel. The jet lurched slightly, a warning beep flashing on the screen. The pilot didn't let go. "Who sent you?" The thief gritted his teeth, shaking his head. "You're dead, man. You don't even know who you're dealing with." The pilot tightened his grip. "Try me." A dark chuckle escaped the thief's lips. "You think we're just some crew looking for a payday?" He coughed, his breath shaky. This was never just about the jet. The pilot's jaw clenched. He had assumed this was a standard heist criminals targeting what they thought was an easy score. But now, a deeper, more dangerous truth was unraveling before him. Before he could press for more answers, the radio crackled to life. "Unidentified aircraft, you are flying without clearance. Respond immediately." The pilot glanced at the radar. A second blip had appeared, another aircraft closing in fast. His gut twisted. Someone had been tracking this jet the entire time. The thief smirked. Told you. The pilot shoved him into a seat and secured him with the nearest restraints. He had no time to waste. He switched frequencies, his voice shifting into something colder, sharper. This is Captain, he stopped himself. His old military call sign nearly slipped out, but he wasn't that man anymore. Not officially. This is the rightful pilot of this aircraft, he corrected. Identify yourself. Silence. Then a new voice crackled over the radio. Low, measured, and filled with quiet authority. Didn't think we'd find you this fast. The pilot's fingers tightened on the controls. Who is this? A pause. Then, you know who we are. The past had finally caught up to him. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing. If this wasn't just a random heist, if someone had specifically targeted him, then that meant they knew his history. They knew his skills. And they had planned for this moment. His options were limited. He could try to outmaneuver the approaching aircraft, but that was a risk he wasn't willing to take, not without knowing who was inside. He needed information, and he needed it fast. He turned to the thief. Who are they? The man just smiled. You'll see soon enough. The radio crackled again. You're running out of time. Land the jet, or we'll force you down. The pilot's pulse remained steady, but inside, his mind was a storm. He needed to make a choice. Surrender wasn't an option. If they wanted the jet, they wanted something inside it. Something valuable. And if they wanted him, that meant they had unfinished business. He made his decision. Adjusting his trajectory, he dipped the jet into a sharp descent, racing toward the nearest stretch of land he could use as a makeshift runway. If they wanted him grounded, fine, but he would do it his way. The other aircraft followed, but the pilot knew how to make an approach unpredictable. He cut speed at the last possible second, letting the jet skim low over the terrain before touching down with a jarring impact. The wheels screeched, kicking up dust as he forced the plane to a stop. A heartbeat of silence. Then headlights appeared in the distance, speeding toward him. The thief laughed. Told you, man. You were never getting out of this. The pilot unbuckled his harness, rolling his shoulders. We'll see about that. The doors burst open before the cars even stopped. Armed men stepped out, their movements too controlled, too precise to be common criminals. The leader stepped forward, a tall, broad figure whose face remained hidden beneath the shadows. You've been a hard man to find, the leader said, voice unreadable. The pilot didn't flinch. Not hard enough, apparently. The leader chuckled. You know why we're here. The pilot exhaled. I'm starting to. The leader nodded toward the jet. There's something on that plane. Something we need. The pilot glanced back. He had done a full pre-flight check before taking off. As far as he knew, nothing about this jet was unusual, aside from the fact that someone had tried to steal it. Then tell me what it is, he said. The leader shook his head. Not how this works. He gestured and two men stepped forward. You're coming with us. The pilot's mind worked fast. If they wanted him alive, that meant they needed something he had knowledge, skills, or access to whatever was on this plane. That gave him leverage. But leverage only mattered if he played his cards right. He raised his hands slightly, a show of non-resistance. All right, he said. Take me to your boss. The leader smirked. Smart man. As they led him away from the jet, the pilot cast one last glance at the night sky. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.